Welcome to the Holocaust Living History Workshop. I'm Suzanne Hillman, the project manager, and I'm delighted to see you all at this event today. Before I continue, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors. For, well, I don't know, 8 years now at least, the UC San Diego Library and Judaic Studies have supported this program. I also would like to say thank you to those who have made all these events well, I was going to say possible. Not possible, but they have helped with the organizational process. There's Mark Kasimatis. He's been most helpful with the IT, the technical aspect of these events. I would like to thank Dan LaSouza for taping these events, and some of them are actually available on the library channel or on the YouTube channel that is connected to the library. So you can look up programs, and today's event will be featured in a few days or a week or so. I would also like to draw your attention to upcoming events. Many of you have already taken flyers out there. We have the next workshop on April 15th on growing up in the shadow of the Holocaust. And then on the 22nd, we have a special event featuring 2 local filmmakers who will show a film, a brand new film on Lou Dunst. Lou Dunst, as many of you know him, he's quite a well-known San Diego Holocaust survivor. As many of you know, the library launched the Holocaust Living History Workshop to draw attention to the Visual History Archive. The Visual History Archive is the world's largest database of videotaped testimonies with interviews of survivors and witnesses of the Holocaust. And it is a tremendous resource. It's very big, and we actually have a special guest here tonight, Jackie Gamache, who's currently working on expanding the archive. She's collecting testimony on Mizrahi Jews. Is that the correct expression? Yes. So it's still growing, the archive. Why am I mentioning this? Well, I'm mentioning it because I want you to know about this wonderful resource, but I'm also mentioning it because even though the archive is so huge, it has currently over 53,000 testimonies, it still does not contain all the stories that are connected with this tragedy that we know as the Holocaust. And we have another speaker here, Mark James, former speaker, Mark James, who has also helped preserve a story that has been forgotten, or would have been forgotten if it hadn't been for the efforts of Mark James. So I think it is important to know that despite the huge size and the great inestimable value of this archive, there are stories that are not in it, and we depend on the work, the labor of love of people like Jackie Gamache, Mark James, Robert Nichols, and of course tonight's speaker, Herman Grishaver. I'm pleased now to introduce Robert Nichols, who is himself a child survivor from Nazi Germany, but not a German, actually a Russian, or an American, I should say. But officially he was Russian. He has spoken years ago and has told us his fascinating experience of his childhood and his illustrious grandparents. Gustav Landauer, those of you who are interested in German intellectual history, you will know his name. So Robert, would you please come up here? Please help me introduce Robert Nichols.
Thank you. I have to say Russian only in the sense that my father was Russian, and at that time in Germany, your citizenship was 100% through your father, but I was born in Berlin. But I am an American, you're right. I think all of us realize the pivotal role that chance plays in our lives, beginning with the accident of our birth and extending through the careers we follow, the friends and partners in life that we meet, and which of the myriad forks in the road of life that we take every day. For those of us who were born into Jewish families in Germany during the time of the Nazis, or were born Jewish in the countries overrun by the Nazis in the late 30s and during World War II, the one overriding fact in our lives that can never be far from our minds is the enormous good fortune that we had in escaping the fate of so many millions whose lives were lost or terribly damaged. to be able to live out our lives in America, to be able to love and to work, to have children and grandchildren, rather than to have suffered grievously and died miserable deaths, as so many millions did, is an indescribable blessing. And these are the worlds entire that never would have been had we not had our lives saved. Dr. Herman Grishaver, a good friend of mine, will today relate his story and that of his forebears, just as I did a couple of years ago in this room. Now, speaking of chance, although we did not meet until 1968 here in San Diego, our early lives were remarkably and almost inexplicably similar. Although Herman has had the continuing good judgment to be and remain 3 years younger than I am, I haven't been able to change that. I've tried. We were both born in Europe and came to America at age 3 and settled with our families in Manhattan. We attended the same elementary school, PS9 in Manhattan, and the same junior high school known as Joan of Arc Junior High School, which sounds like a Catholic parochial school, but in fact it's a public school and was filled with little Jewish kids like us. We both attended Bronx High School of Science. Now, we did go to different colleges and medical schools, but we both interned at San Francisco General Hospital, and we both took neurology residence and became neurologists. Now, there is no explanation for that extraordinary coincidence, because we never knew each other or knew of each other, and we only met here in San Diego in 1968 when he was an incoming new clinical neurologist joining a practice in East County, and I was the first full-time neurologist at UCSD, the new UCSD School of Medicine. Now, I'll leave myself behind, thankfully, and relate some of the bare facts about Dr. Grishaver's background, and he, of course, will speak of his family's odyssey. Dr. Grishaver attended and graduated from the University of California at Berkeley, and graduated and got his MD degree in 1964 from the Albert Einstein School of Medicine in New York City. And Dr. Grishaver reminded me, that fact had slipped my mind, that the Albert Einstein School of Medicine came into existence specifically because of the quotas on Jewish students at the medical schools in the United States, particularly around New York. Columbia, some of the most prestigious schools, had strict quotas on Jews. And I had forgotten that, but it's true. I had forgotten that's the reason for being of Albert Einstein. After his internship in San Francisco, he returned to the Einstein Medical Center for training in neurology and joined a neurology practice in East County, where he remained in that practice and in the practice of neurology in San Diego for 20 years. Dr. Grishaver became much more adventurous in 1988 and actually spent 5 years in emergency medicine. And following that, took a new adventure of becoming the one and only neurologist, instead of in a city like San Diego with dozens of neurologists, in a small town in Pennsylvania, Warren, Pennsylvania, where there was no neurologist. He was the one and only and the best neurologist in town. And he is now retired. Well, Dr. Grishaver has done very extensive and wide-ranging research on his family, and for one, I'm anxious to hear about the results of that research.
Thank you, Dr. Nichols. He did leave out one thing, which is that we also have chosen the same automobile, the same model car, independently. So it's possible that we were identical twins, raised 3 years apart. So, but anyway, this is my first slide. And I was born in Antwerp, which has great significance as far as being able to escape from Europe during the German invasion of the Low Countries on May 10th, 1940. It was an accident, really, that we were in Antwerp. The entire extended family lived in Amsterdam. Most of the people were associated with the diamond business. or trained in the diamond industry, including my father. And during the Depression, the diamond industry collapsed all over. And when it picked up again, it picked up first in Antwerp. So my father moved the family there, 1935 or 1936. Then I was born in 1938. My family never really talked about the escape very much. A few highlights. Within a few days of the invasion, my father somehow purchased a car. He'd never learned how to drive, and packed us all up, the four of us, into this car with two other people whom I've never been able to track down, and fled south. That much I knew. It was a big deal that the car broke down at some point in France, and then the rest of the story becomes kind of foggy. I knew that we were in a internment camp for a brief period of time. We were gotten out by a Dutchman, and then we found our way to Lisbon and then to the United States, and that was it. And I had no idea, really, or concept of the extent of time or any details, and they just didn't talk about it, which I think is true of many families that came to the United States. They just didn't talk to the kids. They didn't want to. My parents, maybe they thought I was learning it in school or something like that, and I didn't have much curiosity. In fact, I constructed a little story that we got a car, it broke down, we went to France, we waited for a visa, we got a visa, and then we made our way to Lisbon and we came to the United States, no problem. Wasn't that easy. I didn't think much about it at all and lived my life growing up in New York. Then in 1972, my mother died. I was living on the West Coast. I was in San Diego, in fact. And my brother, who's 11 years older than me, was on Long Island, and we met and went through my mother's effects. My parents had separated by then, and basically he got the heavy things because he was local, and I was in California, so I got a lot of light things, including this box of old photographs, which is not the exact box, but it really looked like this. It was a jumble of old photographs and some papers in it. My brother didn't want it. He didn't have a happy childhood, basically. He didn't want to be reminded of anything. And so I took the box, took it back to California, and put it up in a closet for 30 years until I retired in 2000 and looked at it, and there were all these interesting old photographs and pieces of paper. I thought, well, I'll organize it into an album and, you know, for the kids, and just to organize it. And one of the pictures was this, which is me when I'm at about 2 years old. And this is the actual size of the photographs. They're just teeny things. There's a group photo, and then there's me at about age 2, unknown girl, unknown location. And then there's this group photo. And it took me until I got a computer when I could kind of blow this thing up to realize that this is my brother in the picture, which I never realized. And he's still alive, and I showed him the picture, the enlargement, and I said, where is this? What is this? And he had no idea. He couldn't remember at all. It took me a while to figure out that this is a Dutch flag, not a French flag. So it's a bunch of Dutch people in an unknown town. And at the time I located the photograph, this is what I wrote on the back. France, Spain, Portugal, I don't know. So I took the papers out, and they're all folded up as one would do if they were in a billfold. There's different pieces of paper, some with pencil writing on them. And I opened them up and suddenly realized that this was our escape. These were documents that my father had carried around in Europe during the period of the escape, which it turns out took 13 months. And I was able to outline the time and the place for where we were and what the course of the escape was. And it was this way to Le Mans area, and then towards Bordeaux, south, and we cut west and then finally reach Marseille, and then to Perpignan, then Barcelona, Madrid, out Lisbon. So from these documents, I started to look at what was it like, what was happening at each place and at each point in time. And the first document chronologically is the garage bill. He was carrying around the bill for when the car broke down. And it has a date, June 1st, 1940. It has the location, which is this town, which is near Le Mans, which is south and west of Paris. And it describes that he wore out the clutch, they fixed gears, they gave him a tank of gas. It has the name of the car, the registration, everything that you would want to know about the car. And the date. Well, the interesting thing about the date is that it's June 1st. We had left Antwerp probably May 14th or 15th rather than May 10th, because I think nobody realized how fast the Germans were approaching. The other thing is that he had to get a car, and he had to get maybe money, cash, something, diamonds, gold. And this was a holiday weekend. This was the weekend of Pentecost, which is a holiday throughout Europe, so the banks are closed Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So they couldn't have really done anything with the bank until Tuesday. So I figure we left 14th or 15th. Here's June 1st, and conveniently, about 15 days to travel 300 miles, which means 20 miles a day. So if they were in a car 4 hours a day, that means that they were traveling at an average speed of 5 miles an hour. So I'm thinking, why is it 5 miles an hour when it just takes, here, Google says 6 hours. And the reason is that this was not my father's bright idea to leave Antwerp. 20% of Belgium decided to leave Belgium. A population of 8 million people, approximately 1.5 million people fled Belgium. There was an enormous panic. It was huge at the time and reported all over and largely forgotten because the rest of World War II kind of dominated the news. But at the time, this was big, this enormous flood of people leaving Belgium into northern France. And of course, the German army was advancing through the north of France as well very quickly, and then the north of France emptied out. Such that by the time the Germans reached Paris, Paris had emptied out. The population of 5 million had reduced to about 700,000. And during the whole period before the armistice or the surrender and the separation of the country into so-called Free France, Vichy France, and German-occupied France, between 9 and 10 million people are on the roads fleeing. This is a pilot looking down. I was able to find the date that he took off, which was May 22nd, and what he was looking at, which was the city of Arras in northern France. And Arras is halfway between Antwerp and the town where the car broke down. And May 22nd is halfway in time between when we left Belgium and when we reached where the car broke down. And he describes, and this is the town, this is 1 week's drive, and then another week, and we're down in Le Mans. Here's Paris, so we were here by then. And what he saw was the roads, all roads, filled with people. The most interesting sentence in the quote is that somewhere in the north of France, a boot has scattered an anthill, and the ants are on the march. And we were one of the ants. It's possible that we were down there in these crowds, mobs of people, cars, baby carriages, bicycles, buses, animals. The roads were strafed by German planes and Italian planes. And approximately 100,000 people died on the roads during the Great Exodus. So finally, that's good for the Q&A, what they did for food, but I don't have the time for that right now. So okay, France is divided the third week in June. So, and this is German occupied. My parents were aiming for a coastal city to escape. That avenue is closed, so they had to cut east. The next stop is in a little town called Bord, and it's based on this document, which is again one of these little tiny kind of airmail type of paper that you can see through. And on the back, you can see through to the back is all the details about the car. It's from the gendarmerie in Bord, and it gives us permission, and it outlines the name of everybody in the family. Gives the job as a businessman in French. He's Dutch. My father. There's me, infant, age 1.5. And it says we're going to this town called Capandu. And there it is on the map. So we're aiming for Marseille. The neat thing about this is that what I learned quickly is that every single document is packed with information if you look for it. So Capandu, I looked up Capandu. Capandu at that time, and even now, is a tiny village, under 1,000 people. It was probably under 700 during the war. It's, there are vineyards. Why were they going to Capandu? France has approximately 70,000 villages of 1,000. What could possibly be the reason? So, and there's another note, which is interesting, that my father wrote, and this is the back of the garage bill. And he's writing a note saying, I've had yet another accident with the car, and they're giving me a hard time. I'm in the gendarmerie. I'll be back in Capandu in a few days. Don't worry. And what this is obviously, or became obvious, is that he's sending a telegram to my mother, who's in this little village, and he's in Carcassonne at the gendarmerie because of the car accident. And he's using the back of the garage bill as a notepad. So they stayed in Capandu for a while. So I went to the Google and typed in Capandu 1940, and the second hit is gave the answer. The answer, a woman who was a teenager in 1940 is talking about her wartime experiences. She was a messenger for her aunt in Capandu. Her aunt was part of a resistance network, and lo and behold, the aunt first of all, had been a spy for Belgium during World War I. And secondly, she had married a doctor in 1920 in Amsterdam, a Dutch Jewish doctor who practiced in Amsterdam from 1920 to 1935. So it's hard to imagine that there's any other reason why they would aim for Capandu, except that they found out, they knew that this doctor had practiced there, they learned it on the road, or they actually went to the doctor as a patient. I contacted municipal archives in Amsterdam, and they determined that he'd had offices in various places in Amsterdam during that period of time. So that was the reason for that little town. And this is the house. He bought a very nice, really a mansion called the Chateau du Parc, and this was actually the center of a little resistance network later on during the war. But undoubtedly, this was a family that would be sympathetic to a Dutch family that was fleeing. But they couldn't be of much help, and they probably were directed to go to Marseille. So here's Marseille. This is the old port region. This is the main drag, the Canabière, and this is the end of the old port. It goes out like this. Marseille was jammed with people as well. Population was 600,000 before the Great Exodus, and it's expanded to probably 1 million for at least a while. Not everybody was Jewish. Eventually, the non-Jews migrated slowly back up north, but the Jews were not allowed to return to occupied France. This is a picture taken at the time in front of the American embassy in Marseille. People lined up trying to get a visa out. And these are photographs that were taken for the purposes of a visa or a passport. This is my father, mother, and this is my brother. He was 13 at the time. And on the back is the date, 3 September 1940, and the street, exactly where the photograph was taken. This is, has anyone heard of Varian Fry, the journalist? Okay. This is exactly the neighborhood and the time when Varian Fry arrived in Marseille to try and get visas for a select group of refugees. My family was not part of the select group. He was not, a writer, a painter, an artist, a mathematician, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the photo studio. This is the hotel where Varian Fry set up his first office. This is the American embassy. And then these other dots are places that my parents were at, or Varian Fry was at during the same period of time. And this is all walking distance. Here's the train station where everybody arrived. I assume he didn't have the car by then. But there's no evidence that Varian Fry ever helped our family. And I looked in the New York, at Columbia University Varian Fry archives for information. There was nothing there. So we're proceeding through France. And on my birthday, October 4th, 1940, a Vichy law was passed saying that all Jewish foreign nationals can be interned by decision of their local police chief. And we were in a camp. We were obviously not in a camp in September, but sometime in October we were in a camp. And this is a map showing the concentration camps or internment camps in France during World War II. This is occupied, and this is free France, Vichy France. And Marseille is down here, and we were undoubtedly at one of these three camps, probably Rive Salt, which is a family camp. And the next document is from Perpignan, and it's dated October 20th, 1940, and it's signed by presumably a Dutchman, J.W. Kolkman, and it has a diplomatic stamp on it, and it says the undersigned J.W. How many people speak French here? Good, so most of you will have to believe everything I say. What it says, yeah, you could say, don't tell them what it really says.
But you pronounce the French words very, very well.
Thank you. Right, oh, good, okay. Now I'll really turn it on. Okay, the undersigned vice consul for the Netherlands certifies that the Grishaver family can remain in France, and he tells who they are, we're all named, can remain in France because they're unable to return to their customary residence, and they have sufficient means that they will not need to be supported by the state. In other words, they won't need to be on welfare. The phrase that the American government used to keep refugees out was that they would not become LPC, which stood for liable to become a public charge. So this is saying the same thing, only in France. He's saying something which is really ridiculous, but it's an official-looking document. It certainly helped us stay in France and get us out of a refugee camp. Whether he did it or not is unclear at this point. Okay. So who was J.W. Kolkman? That's the next question. As far as I knew, he was like a clerk or a functionary. He was working in an office and with a diplomatic stamp. And after some searching, I was able to find an article in a rather obscure journal. This is the journal of the National Institute for War Documentation in Holland, the NIOD, National Institute for War Documentation. And there was an article in there about Kolkman. And the title was J.W. Kolkman. A subtitle was The Rescuer Who Could Not Rescue Himself. And it goes through the life of J.W. Kolkman. He was born into a prosperous family, his Catholic family, kind of obviously. His father was a finance minister in Holland. There was a number of brothers and one sister. He entered a Jesuit academy, and finally, after he was born in 1896, and he went through a full Jesuit training until 1926 or so. He was 29 or 30, and then left the priesthood because of his family background. He was reared with a French governess. He spoke French fluently, and he went into journalism and became a journalist in Paris, sending, it was like a stringer, sending articles back to newspapers in Amsterdam or Holland. There's him in his 20s with nieces and nephews. So he's in Paris, and there's an invasion. Eventually, everybody flees to the south, including Dutch diplomats. And the diplomats set up refugee offices to handle Dutch refugees. The professional diplomats, a number of them were called back to the Dutch government in exile in London. And there's a vacancy in Perpignan, and they asked Kolkman, who's just hiding out in the town. He's not Jewish. He doesn't really have to worry that much. They ask him to help in the Perpignan office, and they give him an honorific title of vice consul. And he plays the role completely. What does he do? He makes tours of the refugee camps and gets the Dutch people out. He tries to get visas for them. He sets, in January 1941, he establishes a safe house in a tiny village right near Perpignan, where he houses people who can't live in a hotel or don't have the means. So this is what he does to Dutch refugees in general, and they fall into two distinct groups. About half of them are young men, 90% non-Jewish, who've fled Holland but want to join the Allies, and they get trained as military people. And then there's older people, Jewish families mainly. So he's helping everybody. He continues to help people through 1941 and 42, and then in 1942, in November, the German authorities basically fire the Vichy government, and they take over all of Germany, and they order all the refugee offices closed. Well, the safe house is filled with refugees, and they tell the people who are working there to get the refugees out, but they want preference given to the young men who can fight for the military. The other people can fend for themselves. And they send repeated messages to Kolkman telling him to get out. And for some reason or other, which they don't understand, he doesn't leave until a month later, till January 1943. And he and his wife, they've been arranging for passeurs for 2 years. They're waiting for a passeur, and witnesses say that they were stopped by German officers who were possibly alerted by the fact that his wife was so nervous that her teacup or glass of wine was trembling. They inspect his papers, they arrest him. He remains arrested for a year. His wife is released. He eventually is transferred to a concentration camp, Dora, where they made rockets. He falls ill. He's put on what's called a Himmeltransport. If the workers were sick, they would just get rid of him. And he dies on the train. So my next step was to do more research about the family and also more about Kolkman. And so I went to the National Archives in The Hague, and this is the author of the article, who's one of the chief archivists, or was, but he just retired, who did all the research. And of course, Kolkman was his hero. He discovered him. And so I start to get interested in applying to Yad Vashem for him to be a righteous Gentile. That's me taking notes. So I'm in, and his name is Sirk Plantinga, and I'll refer to him as Sirk from now on. I'm in his office. My wife is taking the picture, and on the wall is a poster because Sirk was giving talks about Plantinga, about Kolkman, and here's the picture from the book, and this is another picture which I didn't see before. Then there's this interesting group photo which is in the poster, which is on the poster, like this. And here's this arched doorway, and here's this flag, and here's a group of people. Actually, Kolkman is in this photograph. And here's the one that I had in the box. So we were there. And on the previous one, I'm holding the hand of a little girl, and that's the little girl there. Now, a backstory is that this girl here published this photo. She's also here. She published this photo in a memoir which came out last year. So she's alive and wrote a memoir and has this exact photo in her memoir. So I called her up, and that was interesting. Kolkman also got us a visa out of France to go to the Dutch West Indies. And here are our names on a group visa out of France.
Have you not been named yet?
Well, he also, everything has a reason. He writes in that I'm 2 years old and I was born in Switzerland. Now, maybe this was some protection that I wasn't, I don't know. I haven't figured that out. And finally, there's another letter dated March 26, 1941, signed by Kolkman. And it says, the first letter he wrote was, they don't need any help because they have money, they can support themselves. Here he's writing a letter to the Dutch diplomats in the refugee office in Lisbon. And he's saying, so obviously we're in Lisbon, please help the Grishavers, they run out of money. He's desperate to get to work, because he can't sustain his family anymore. And he gave up his place on the visa list. This was like the dumbest thing you could possibly do. He must not have realized how hard it was to get a visa. He had one, but he didn't want to go to the Dutch West Indies. Why? Because the Dutch government wanted to set up a diamond industry in the Dutch West Indies, the Dutch government in exile in London. And he didn't want to go to the West Indies. He wanted to go to New York, where there was a diamond business. So he gambled that he would get a visa. So this summarizes which I've told you, what Kolkman did for us. He gave us a letter of recommendation, helped probably getting into Spain, visas, the letter, getting out of the internment camp. This is a little raggedy piece of paper, again, maybe this big. This is by a French prefecture saying we can leave France to get a visa in Lisbon. There's no permission to go into Spain or through Spain, which must have caused some anxiety because Spain was one of the three Axis powers, right? Germany, Italy, Spain. But in fact, Franco let Jews through. He did not turn Jews over to the Germans. Now, on the back of the paper that lets us out of France are these scribbles. These are two things in pencil, which when I manipulated the image a little bit, again, my father's using this as a notepad, and this is a paragraph which is repeated down here, and it's saying, please help a Dutch family in need get a visa for Ecuador or some other country in order to transit to the USA. So, as of this point, he doesn't have a visa. He had a visa to the West Indies, he gave it up, but he doesn't have a visa, and he's writing to some stranger, Al Poppers, and on the top is a copy of what the heading of a telegram office would be. It says name, address, who's writing the telegram, and then it gives his address, Grishaver, Avenida 5 Outubro, 145, and this is Portuguese, and this is a main avenue in Lisbon. So we're in Lisbon, and we don't have a visa. The Dutch Refugee Office in Lisbon had a guest book, which is in the National Archives in The Hague. So I looked in the guest book to see if my father signed into the guest book, and here he is. This is March 26th, right when Kolkman's letter arrived, in fact. This is his signature, and I found 7 times that he checked in to the refugee office, March 26th, and this is April 9th. And here he is at the bottom, he got in late. And then after that, there are no signatures, so I have to assume he got a visa. He doesn't need their help anymore. And sure enough, I mean, there's more story I could tell, but anyway, we got on a ship. This is the ship, the Nyassa. It was a mixed passenger and cargo ship, which the Portuguese inherited from Germany after World War I. And what they did was they converted the cargo area to a dorm, and these are all bunk beds, tiered bunk beds they doubled and tripled the passenger space by doing that. And we got to New York. The ship was stopped by a submarine on the way, but nothing much happened other than that. This is my passport photo, and I think I win a bet with Dr. Nichols. No, he says that his 2-year-old photo is the cutest possible, and this is mine. Now, my father did tell me practically nothing about the escape. I did ask him when he was in his 80s, he was still alert but cranky, but he was always cranky. How did you manage this? This is before I did all the research. And he said, the answer was 3 words, we were lucky, which not much help. And then one of my sons visited later on. He was a little older, and he's still cranky. And he asked him, how did you do this? And he said, I had diamonds in one hand, gold in the other, and a blonde baby. So that's the long and the short of it. Okay, we made it out, but everybody else was trapped in Amsterdam. Holland surrendered in 4.5 days. people tried to escape and they couldn't. So what I'm going to try and do is quickly run through two stories of families and how I got them through documents. Oops. Don't have to study this. There's not going to be a quiz afterwards, but this is a rough genealogy chart. This is the Grishaver side. This is my father and his brothers and sisters. This is my mother and her side of the family, the Nichols. And then one of her sisters here married into this family, the Mapurgos. The Mapurgos are the family I'm going to talk about. Black means they were sent to concentration camps and killed. These people. The lines mean that they were in a camp and survived. And I'm putting our internment camp thing as a survival thing. And the yellow means escaped. So we were in a camp but escaped. This is me, this is my brother. These folks were in Amsterdam and escaped in 1942, right when Anne Frank was going into hiding and people were getting call-up notices in July 42, and they got one too. There'll be a little story about this one. So let me talk about the Mapurgos. A terrific source for anybody who's been in a concentration camp, if you want to learn about them, is to contact the International Tracing Service. They have masses of information which they have gathered together. They're all on huge CDs. They give you the information, and then you have to deal with it. So this is a card I got on the Mapurgos, which, again, is just jammed with information. It tells, like, the whole story of the war is in this one card. Chronologically, the card begins with typed entries. And this, what's circled here, tells me that this card was made before this family was sent to a transit camp. Because it has this, it says, gesperd wegens diamant. And it means postponed or delayed, reasons for postponement or delay of being picked up and sent to an internment camp because of the diamond business. Well, my uncle, Leon, was not in the diamond business. He was an antique dealer and a painter, artist. That's him here, gives his job. So the diamond was his wife. And the reason was the Natkill family, the father, my grandfather, was in the diamond business, and he made everybody in the family learn the diamond business. So all the girls learned how to do something to do with diamonds, cutting, polishing, girdling, various specialty items. And when there was a Jewish council which gathered all the information for all the Jews in Amsterdam, they were required to turn over X number of Jews per week for transport to Westerbork, the transit camp, and from there they would be sent to the extermination camps, Auschwitz, Sobibor, Bergen-Belsen, and then Theresienstad. So this is a reason for holding somebody back, because the Germans wanted a diamond industry. They didn't want to deport all the Dutch because they wanted the diamonds as jewelry and currency and as for industrial, for tools. So this is the first entry. And then everything else is handwritten later. This was interesting, P-I-G, pig, pig, it was nothing to do with it. Can anyone guess? Okay, good. It's for the Portuguese Israelites. This is gemeenschap, which means community. Portuguese Jewish community. The Jewish community in Amsterdam was divided into the older, more prestigious immigrants from Portugal who came to Amsterdam with the Spanish and Portuguese expulsions, and the Ashkenazi Jews. And these people in the Jewish Council were aware of status, And this was another reason for delay. There was also a cockamamie theory that the Portuguese Jews weren't racially Jews for some reason. Somebody concocted the theory, and some Germans believed it, and so there was a number of Jews who were able to get certificates of non-Jewish blood authenticity based on the fact that they were Portuguese Jews and their facial characteristics were of a certain nature, and they were exempted. And the fellow who certified all of this was a German lawyer in the SS legal department in The Hague named Kallmeyer. And he knew what was going on, and he probably saved a large number of Jews by certifying them as not being racially Jewish through this ridiculous system. So that was a potential out for this family. This is a WBK, it says Westerbork, which means Westerbork, and this is the date that they were picked up in Amsterdam, 20 June 1943, and they were put into Barrack 55 in Westerbork. And it goes on, they survived the war and has the addresses of where they came back to because their house had been taken over by another family. And here's a photograph of Jews being picked up on June 20th, 1943 in their neighborhood. And the fascinating thing about this photograph, it's worth 1,000 words. You gotta, here's the neighbors. They finished with a little cup of coffee and they're looking out the window, and they're all the neighbors getting picked up to be transported to the east, never to be seen again. And there's another family just looking out the window and seeing what's going on. Is that your family? No. They're the neighbors who are not Jewish. And it was this person who helped save the Morpurgos based on the fact that my uncle had painting skills. On October 18th, 1943, this man, Gopal, who was an art historian, called a meeting of the top SS leaders in The Hague and gave them a list of approximately 20 people, all Jewish, who he said, I want them assigned to help me with a special project, which is to collect art for the proposed Hitler Museum in Linz. And here's my uncle and the whole family are mentioned. They were in Westerbork, and he says to them, to the head of the SS, the head German Nazi in The Hague, I want these people out, and they're going to evaluate art and so on. And they do it. Why? Because his chain of command is from him to somebody else to Hitler himself. So he can go in there and say, I want these people, and yes, sir. And this is a folder in the National Institute of War documents, which has all the documents concerning this art historian getting the family out. Now we also got, and here's his signature, Dr. Erhard Gopal, and he gives the order to get the Morpurgos out of Westerbork, and the person who implements the order is this person. Who's this person? Well, it turns out that this person is a secretary. Her name is Gertrude Slutke. She's the secretary in the SS in The Hague, and her job is to make sure that anybody who applies for an exemption from transport really has a legitimate excuse. Otherwise, they go for labor in the East. And this is her little symbol saying that she's read the document. And the document is dated 15 January 1944, and this goes straight to 4B4, which is Eichmann's headquarters in Berlin. So this is like top tier stuff. And here's Slotky's signature again, and she signs it as police employee. We had a lecture here by Wendy Lauer, and she talked about these horrible women in the East. Well, it turns out that Gertrude Slotky finally met justice because right after the war, she was arrested and interrogated, and she said, well, I'm just a secretary, I'm just following orders. These people who went to the East, I had no idea that they were being killed. Well, actually, in 1967, in Munich, there was a trial of two top Dutch leaders, Nazi leaders, and Gertrude Slotky, and she was found guilty of implementing the murder of 54,000 Dutch Jews. So, but she was a super secretary. She would personally interview everybody, but she was also somebody who, if a document was given to her, she wouldn't take a document directly from the Jew. It would have to be through an intermediary, so she didn't come into direct contact. So she was a committed Nazi, and she is mentioned actually in this book in a footnote, but she's like in the West, not in the East. Even Gopal, who dealt with Slotky, he gives her the order, get these people out of Westerbork. They do. She does. Said after the war, he was interviewed about all the stolen art that he was involved in as a chief buyer for the Netherlands. He said he had never met anybody with such inner coldness, and she was roundly hated during the war by any Dutch who met her. Part of those documents, the meeting on October 18th, 1943, is an arrangement that Gopal was implementing for the Katz family. He's also ordering that with the Dutch SS, that 25 members of the Katz family can leave Holland and emigrate in exchange for this painting, a Rembrandt. And this was felt to be so important that the deal go through and appear legitimate that the family was escorted by Germans to the French and Spanish border, and only when they crossed the border was the painting released to the German authorities, and this would end up, in the Hitler Museum. So the Katz family had a good deal. The brothers also had good deals. They actually, Benjamin Katz stayed in Amsterdam during the war and sold a lot to the Nazis, and his brother Nathan stayed in Switzerland. Okay, the Walpurgis was sent to Theresienstad. Theresienstad was a fortress town that was built in the 18th century. There are the fortifications, and there was a village inside which held 7,000 people normally. And it had various uses until World War II, when the Germans turned it into a show camp or propaganda camp, and that's what Eichmann called it. It's the only camp that's mentioned in the Wannsee conference minutes, which Eichmann wrote. It was called an old age camp, and it was a place to stick Jews who were internationally known, some Danish Jews that the king did allow to be removed. It was felt to be like a ghetto, a paradise ghetto, and was even advertised and sold to people. However, it was in essence a transit camp. 140,000 entered, and only 17,000 of them survived the war, because they either died in the camp, about a third died in the camp, and 2/3, the camp got too crowded, which was when the population was 40 or 50,000 instead of 7,000, they would just transfer them out. there was inspection of the camp by the Red Cross, and prior to that, a certain region of the camp was cleaned up, painted, made beautiful, and the International Red Cross toured it. Everything looked great. They gave a good report. The Danish Jews were being treated fabulously. And after that, everybody during that inspection, all the Jews during that inspection were rounded up and sent to Auschwitz. So they, dead men tell no tales. There was a photo crew, a film crew, on arrival when the Mapurgos reached Theresienstad. They left on January 18th, 1944. They left Holland. They arrived January 20th, and these are the Dutch Jews from Amsterdam arriving. And here they are unloading at the camp. The railroad station was about a mile from the camp, and everybody schlepped their stuff over that mile. It was winter, and it was snowy until they got into the camp. The International Tracing Service also provided the room list, the arrival list, showing where the Mapurgos, here the Mapurgos are arriving, and the room they were assigned to. It was a converted kind of a group kitchen, and with a map, this is where they lived, where they were in Theresienstadt. Interestingly enough, Leon Mapurgo was supposed to work on 4 paintings which went with him on January 18th. The Mapurgos arrived, but the paintings didn't. The German authorities in Berlin decided that they could not trust Jews to work on valuable paintings. So they kept the paintings and they put it in a storage facility in Prague. And Gopal then actually went to bat for the Mapurgos, or for the paintings, and said, hey, the paintings are not valuable unless they're restored, and I want these people to restore them. So 5 months later, the paintings were transferred to Theresienstadt, and this is probably part of the reason, or half the reason, why the Mapurgos survived the war. They were restoring paintings. But the daughter, at the bottom of the genealogy chart, the daughter is alive, my cousin, and I asked her, how come you survived? She said, well, my father, she didn't say my father was restoring paintings. She said, my father was painting pictures for the camp commandant, still lifes and landscapes, and he would take them and put his name on them and sell them in Prague and Vienna. So this is maybe why, instead of restoring paintings, he was actually saved, because I was able to find a recording of a woman who worked in an art shop right next to the Mapurgos. Her name is Lily Fischel. She survived the war. She lived in London, and she was giving a testimonial about her war experience. And she said, yeah, I used to make these little place cards that they made, and they would sell them in Vienna and Prague. And then they didn't want me to make them anymore, so they shipped us all to Auschwitz. But before they did that, these 2 nice restorers from next door, Mapurgo and Cohen, would come over, and they offered to teach us how to paint and how to restore. And, I had been working 8-10 hours making the little place cards, and I was so tired, and I just couldn't do it. And I should have done it, because then when I made it to England, I could have had this craft of restoring paintings, but she survived anyway. But what point can I make about that? Yeah, the more you look, I mean, everything I looked at, it turned out to be bigger. Could I figure out whether Mapurgo really restored paintings or just painted them for the camp commandant? The answer is he did both, and I proved it with this testimonial. Oops. Okay. Uncle Solomon. This is somebody I discovered, an uncle I've never met. I don't have a photograph. He's on my father's side. And what happened was, one of the families who escaped, they were all in yellow on that side. One of the people who escaped, one of the reasons that they escaped when they did was because the month before, one of the daughters had been arrested for not wearing the Jewish star and was put in jail for 2 weeks. And she got out of jail. They got a lawyer. They got her out of jail. And then they got the notice for her to report to the central station for deportation. And so they had an escape planned for 3 weeks from then, and they moved it up to the next day. And it was very complicated and expensive. And so this one surviving cousin, and I said, well, just for the fun of it, let me see if I can find the arrest record of your sister in Amsterdam. And it turns out that in the past 5 or 10 years, the Amsterdam police blotters have been digitized. There are PDF files, but they made all the names searchable. So I put in a search for the Mapurgos, the Grishavers, the Nichols, and this Grishaver turned up. A Mapurgo turned up, and a Nichol turned up, which was also interesting. They reported that their bicycles were stolen. This is in 1941. And it shows that even during the depth of the occupation, they still had some trust or faith in the civil authorities. Even though they were being persecuted by the Germans, they figured, well, the Dutch police, somebody stole my bike, it's a theft, and they'll maybe try and find out. But anyway, the third one was this. This is the uncle. I'm telling you ahead, he died in a concentration camp. And this is their son. And this is an image of the police blotter. And it says, Solomon, this man, Officer Voskuil, brought in Solomon Grishaver, and it gives his age and address, which is definitely in the family. And he says, we're bringing him in to be transferred to jail for his 2-year jail sentence. So, oh, nobody ever told me about that. If there's a jail sentence, it means that there was a trial. So I was referred to the North Holland archive for the trial. And I couldn't get the trial, but I got an appellate court. He was found guilty of something, and he appealed. And what it was a scheme that Albert Einstein, one of Dr. Nichols' remote relatives, would not have done. What he did was, during the 30s, probably 37, 38, he tried to make a little extra money by teaching young Jewish draftees into the Dutch army, prospective draftees, teach them how to fake being deaf in one ear. To fool an ENT specialist, and the ENT specialist would certify he's deaf in one ear so he doesn't need to serve in the army. And he charged 300 guilders for these instructions, which was a considerable amount. It was equal to about the average laborer's monthly wage. But I guess the ENT physician became suspicious when all of these young Jewish men came in deaf in one ear. And one of them said, the jig is up, and this is the guy who was giving me all these lessons. So he was sentenced to 3 years, and on appeal, it was a first offense, 2 years. So this poor guy, they arrested him during the occupation 1 month after the German invasion. They picked him up, put him in jail for 2 years, and then when he got out of jail, they picked him up and sent him to Westerbork, and then he was killed in Auschwitz. So that was not a happy story. So now I want to see if I can quickly, it's getting late, get back to Jerusalem and Mr. Kolkman. I thought, this is just so simple that he should be honored as a righteous Gentile. He saves so many people, he helped our family, and so on and so forth. It turned out that Cirque was sick of dealing with Yad Vashem. Who was sick? Sirk, the archivist. The archivist who got all this biographical information on the ex-priest who was saving Jews. A man named Philip Jacobs had applied to Yad Vashem in 2000 and 2006, and the claim was rejected. And in 2008, based on I thought, new information about all the things Kolkman had done, I applied, and it was also rejected. Now, what do you have to do to be approved as a righteous Gentile? You have to risk your life to save Jews. You have to do it for no monetary gain, or there's no quid pro quo that has occurred. And you have to show a specific commitment to saving Jews. So one of the objections why Kolkman did not get the award from Yad Vashem, as Sirk understood it, was what he was told was that, well, you know, he worked in a refugee office and he helped everybody who came in. He helped Jews and non-Jews. Where's the specific commitment? He was just doing his job. And there was an objection. The objection was that for a 1 month period in December 1942, he disobeyed the orders of his government. He was supposed to help all these people get out, and we don't see these people having arrived anywhere. They didn't get out, and for 1 month he was told to get out immediately, and he delayed a month. He brought it on himself. So those were the objections. So actually I did some more research, and here's a copy of a telegram. It was a transcription of a telegram to authorities in Lisbon from the foreign minister for the Netherlands in London, Eco van Kleffens, and this is Eco van Kleffens, who was a noted diplomat then and after the war, but it's saying, we want them to get out, we want these people evacuated, and preference must be given to people who can help in the war effort. So basically, who is that? That's the 50% who are young men who are predominantly non-Jewish. And people with, families, they're not going to be in the war effort. Sirk, between 2006 and 2009, 2010, 2011, Sirk had logged all of the people who arrived in London and said, Kolkman helped me escape. And their debriefings were described when they left Holland, when they left France. And they're all during the December period when Kolkman seemed to be doing nothing. In red are the Jews. So Kolkman was not giving preference to the non-Jews. If anything, he was ignoring the orders to give preference to people who could help in the war effort. On top of that, these are other people who could not. How did you leave France? The visas were stopped, the refugee offices were closed. You had to go over the Pyrenees during the winter. These are the people who could not make it over the winter. Here's the Lopez Cardozo family, born in 1873. They're not going to be hiking in their 70s over the Pyrenees, and so on. And 12 out of 18 of those people were Jewish. This was a peculiar name which Sirk recognized as not being Jewish. So I put it in italics. And it turns out that somehow or other, with archivist magic, he was able to determine that this was really a Dutch Jewish physician for whom Kolkman had gotten false papers and a false identity. His name was Bernard Rowe, and he was recreated as a Catholic, Mr. Noteboom, and he was the protector of this group for whom Kolkman found safe houses up north. So again, no preference for non-Jews, rather the opposite. And secondly, specific, knowledge of the plight of Jews by giving a Jew a false identity. Then we found out that somebody had found some previously undiscovered archives in Perpignan with Kolkman's name all over it. I'll kind of make this fast. One of them was Philip Jacobs, whose application for Kolkman to Yad Vashem was turned down in 2006. He was still alive. And here's his visa application filled out by Kolkman. And he's an Orthodox Jew. It has his occupation as Protestant, and he's listed as a student. Well, he was a student. He was young enough to be a student. He has his religion falsified. And here's another man who's a jeweler, who's Jewish, and his religion is Protestant. And since he's a jeweler, which is a telltale Jewish occupation, he's listed as an employee. And here's Kolkman's application himself, written by him. He tried to get out with a visa. Here's his passport photo, enlarged. He's dressed to the hilt. He is a diplomat. Pinstripe suit, a little pin here, and it was rejected. Don't pass it on. And the date is January 8th, 1943, and January 11th is when he tried to escape with his wife. So the total of people he saved is this sum. This is what Cirque got. This is what I got. These are all the archives that Cirque scoured to figure out his 241 list. And this is my contribution. So the irony here is that so Yad Vashem finally gave in, and there was a ceremony. Now, normally the Yad Vashem ceremony is given to the person who's been rescued. The rescuer or the rescuer's family or descendant. In the case of Kolkman, there was no direct descendant. There were some remote relatives. They'd never heard of him. So Cirque prevailed on them to have the award go to the Foreign Ministry, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands. And then this became an intergovernmental ceremony instead of the usual Yad Vashem thing where there's 20 old people in a room off of the lobby of a Holiday Inn or something. This is the Van Cleffen Zaal. Van Cleffen was the minister who asked Kolkman to give it preferentially to non-Jews. This is the international conference room in the Foreign Ministry where international conferences are held. These are translator booths. I mean, it's a nice place. This is an Israeli singer who began the ceremony. Here's me. And the passport photos that I showed earlier, I gave a little shorter spiel. Here's the Israeli ambassador to the Netherlands giving the award to the representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She is the equivalent of the Secretary of State. And this is the Foreign Minister for the Netherlands. And he gave a speech, he gave a speech, I gave a speech, Cirque gave a speech. So this is what organizing this box of old photographs led to. Thank you.
Are there questions? We're coming with the microphone. Please wait until we hand the microphone to you. Yes,
Yeah.
If you could, please.
Okay. Hello, my name is Miriam Yajan, and I have a lot in common with both of you. I was born in Belgium just before the war, but in Brussels, and my family left Brussels the day they started bombing, went to the seashore of the closest town, La Panne, close to France, and then when the Germans marched in, we did the trek, which you had there, through France, Toulouse, Spain, and then Morocco, and arrived in New York July 22nd, 1941. My parents, unlike your parents, spoke a lot about the whole exodus. And I think maybe in part your family seemed to have gotten a lot of help from the Dutch. My parents got no help from anyone. In fact, when they left Belgium, they were about to become Belgian citizens, so they had not bothered to renew their Polish passports. My father was born in Poland, so they had no passports. And so they were traveling, they had no way to get out of Europe without passports. And in Perpignan, and this is an example, I think, of the kind of chutzpah they had. A combination, what got them out was chutzpah, a lot of smarts, and luck. When they got to Perpignan, to Toulouse, they went to the Polish consulate to get passports. The consul had fled to England. They went into the office and essentially wrote up their own passports. My father filled them up. They had brought pictures. They found the stamp, stamped them, and that's it. From then on, we had Polish passports. They did this kind of stuff over and over. But they were also very, very lucky. And I think maybe because their getting out was so extraordinary that they talked so much about it, especially my father. So I was actually here about 2 years ago speaking about a book I wrote in my father's voice about the Exodus. And I'm just wondering, did your families by any chance live on Central Park West in New York?
No, we were between Broadway and Amsterdam on 86th Street.
Okay, you were close. And you?
I was between Broadway and Amsterdam on 71st.
Okay.
It was a different world.
Yeah,
You played in Central Park, we played in Riverside Park.
Yeah, okay, because there was a whole Belgian Jewish enclave. Maybe it was more Brussels Jews going from around 96th Street to 105th along the park and behind the park.
Well, yeah, the whole West Side was Jewish and immigrant.
Yeah.
What I would say is that, first of all, Coltman was the one who really helped us. He was helping people who were predominantly, I think, 100% Dutch. And there were complaints after the war that the Jews were not being helped as much by the people manning the offices in Marseille, Sète, and sometimes Toulouse. So it did sometimes depend on the individual in the office.
Oh, yeah.
And he was somebody who was not a career diplomat, and he didn't care about protocol. So he wrote all these false documents. He was also part of the French resistance. I didn't mention that.
Yeah.
And he was awarded the Croix de Guerre by France, but he was awarded nothing by the Dutch government except a plaque in one hallway of the foreign ministry, because the only thing in his records was this negative comment that he disobeyed orders and these people didn't arrive. Well, the date of the critical report was such, it took a year for people who escaped the Netherlands to arrive in London. They didn't just go to London, they went to Curacao, then they went to Canada, and then they maybe went to London. So all those people who escaped in December hadn't arrived yet. They arrived in May and June. So there was an investigation after the war called the Cleveringa Commission. And a lot of diplomats were singled out as being not helpful, not recognizing the Jewish plight, except Kolkman.
Okay. I just want to say one more thing. My understanding was that you had to have visas to get into Spain. In fact, my parents, it was a whole other story of how they got the visas to Spain, and then we were stopped on the Spanish border for 2 weeks, even though we had visas, because the Spaniards just decided to close the border. So
They turned the border on and off, and border guards were subject to bribes. A lot of that was going on.
Any more questions?
Could you, in 50 words or less, expand a little on Yad Vashem?
Yeah, sure.
I'm not sure everybody knows,
Okay.
like me.
Oh, okay. Yad Vashem is part of the Israeli government, and it's set up to basically never forget, to memorialize the people who suffered as a result of the Holocaust, to do research and amass information about the Holocaust period. And there's a division which honors Gentiles who helped to save Jews. And they have there's a Holocaust museum in Jerusalem. There's a whole Holocaust center, and then everybody who has been named righteous among the Gentiles is honored. It used to be honored with planting a tree, but they got too many trees, and so now your name is put up on a board or a bulletin board, and also on a website. That's about it.
Any more questions?
One fast one. I appreciated the map that you showed, and was there any evidence that your parents tried to get a ship in Marseille and in Barcelona? Because there are two big ports that, to me, it would have been logical if they could have gotten a ship then and going to Lisbon.
There were people who got out of Spain. They would get out of Vigo, which is on the Atlantic coast. Barcelona, no. I never heard of anybody leaving out of Barcelona. The problem with Marseille was that after the summer of 1940, the port was closed. So you couldn't exit. Some people did during the beginning of the summer. Towards the end, there was too much illegal traffic, and so the port was simply closed. And then you could only get out through Spain or Switzerland. Yes, the back, yeah.
You mentioned concentration archives. You had shown a list of people that your family was in the concentration camp.
Yes.
Could you talk a little bit about the organization that's maintaining that?
I'm not clear
You
about.
called it International.
Do you mean
Oh,
the
the International
Service?
Tracing Service.
Yes.
I don't know if it's still called the Red Cross International Tracing Service, but if you Google International Tracing Service, they are connected with different archives that have amassed information about people who were in concentration camps, including this massive collection in Bad Arolsen in Germany. And it used to be cruder. I just looked, I used them 5, 6, 7 years ago. Now they have a much slicker web presence with an application form. You fill it out with the name of the person, birth date, everything you know, and they'll track that person and see if they could find their course through transit camps, concentration camps, anything. It's free, available. I filled it out for everybody I could think of, and I got tons back. There's just no time to go into it.
I would actually like to add at this point that our last event this academic year, which will be in June, is precisely on this archive, on the history of the tracing service. So it's in our brochure. J.J. Surbeck, who's an internationally renowned expert on the archive. He's going to speak about this. So all those of you who are interested, definitely come to that event. Do we have one final question?
Yeah,
Yes.
Herman, I've known you for over 30 years, but I never asked you, is there any reason you and actually Dr. Silver went into neurology following this? Is there some, I mean, is there some connection between looking at the puzzle that the human brain and the nerves are and this whole thing that you went through?
I am not now, nor have I ever been, Dr. Silver.
Silver-haired, possibly.
I'm
Well,
sorry,
Nichols.
There is a Dr. Silver who's a neurologist.
there is, Diesel. Sorry about that.
By no stretch of the imagination. No, the answer is identical twins are remarkably similar in their tastes and preferences, and I think that's just part of the coincidence.
Well, thank you, Dr. Grishaver, for a very interesting talk.
A pleasure, a pleasure.
Thank you for all your effort you've taken. I'm a historian and I'm amazed. You've done some marvelous detective work. I'm sure we can all appreciate that.
I
Well,
would say that one characteristic of neurologists, and the question is always, are you compulsive because you're a neurologist? Or are you a neurologist because you're compulsive? And the meticulous and beautiful research you did attests to your compulsion.
Well, living in your house for 2 days testifies to yours, but
Well, thank you all for coming and have a good night.